We're born with a biological slate unequipped for complex logic. Yet within a few years, these neural pathways organize into an engine for advanced reasoning. The process of how that happens is constrained by strict biological limits. Place a young child in front of two identical glasses of water, pour one into a taller, thinner glass, and they will confidently tell you the taller glass holds more liquid. Their brain simply cannot process the logic required to see that the volume remains identical. Contrast that biological ceiling with children working on the streets of Brazil. Without any formal schooling, they routinely execute complex calculations to sell candy. This creates a deep tension in developmental psychology. We have to determine if a child's biological maturation dictates what they are capable of learning, or if targeted social learning is actively driving their biological maturation.
On one side of this debate is Jean Piaget, who argued that cognitive development is an internal biological sequence of stages. On the other side is Lev Vygotsky, who argued that cognition is built externally through socio-cultural scaffolding. To understand the true architecture of the human mind, we need to dismantle both of these models and see exactly how they process information. Piaget established a baseline. Human intelligence operates through internal mental structures called schemas, operational blueprints the brain uses to interpret the world. When a child encounters information easily fitting into these existing blueprints, the brain performs assimilation, absorbing data and remaining in stable equilibrium. But schemas are rigid, which leads to predictable errors. If a toddler's only schema for clown is a man with a bald top and frizzy hair on the sides, they will point at a normal, balding man on the street and shout, "Clown." The visual data matched their blueprint, so they assimilated it. Growth only happens when that assimilation fails. If a parent steps in and explains that the man isn't wearing a costume and isn't trying to make people laugh, the child's existing schema can no longer accept the data. This rejection creates disequilibrium, an unpleasant internal cognitive conflict. To resolve it, the brain is forced into accommodation. The child physically modifies their existing schema, creating a new, more sophisticated mental structure. This flowchart tracks Piaget's precise cyclical engine of intelligence. New situations are assimilated until they cause disequilibrium, forcing the mind to accommodate and return to equilibrium at a higher level of understanding. Piaget insisted this updating process is strictly bound by biological age. The brain transitions through specific developmental stages in a locked order, with no skipping ahead. For educators, the implication is clear. Biological development must precede learning. You cannot teach a child a concept if their internal schema engine hasn't matured enough to process it. This chart outlines Piaget's tests of conservation, designed to empirically prove biological limitations. In the continuous quantity experiment, a child is shown two identical glasses with equal amounts of liquid. One glass is then poured into a taller, narrower container. A child in the early preoperational stage will reliably insist that the taller beaker now contains more liquid. The mechanical cause of this failure is a cognitive limitation called centration. Centration forces the young mind to fixate exclusively on one single variable. The child's attention locks on to the height of the new liquid level, to the total exclusion of the container's width. We see this exact failure across different types of data. If you take two identical rows of checkers and simply spread one row out, the child will claim the longer row has more pieces. They fail these tests because they lack a specific mental tool: reversibility. Reversibility is the cognitive software required to virtually undo an action. The child cannot mentally pour the liquid back into the original glass or squeeze the checkers back together in their mind's eye. Under Piaget's framework, an adult cannot simply explain this logic to the child and expect them to understand. The physical structure of their brain is not ready to accommodate the information. While Piaget mapped the constraints of the biological hardware, his model treats education as a passive waiting game. To explain how learning actively accelerates cognition, we need a different perspective. Lev Vygotsky countered Piaget's timeline by arguing that social interaction and cognitive growth work in the opposite direction. He proposed that learning does not wait passively for biological stages to pass. Instead, social learning precedes development, acting as an external force that pulls the child's biology forward.
This diagram illustrates Vygotsky's cognitive map. The outer boundary contains tasks currently impossible for the child to process. The crucial area is the middle ring, the zone of proximal development, the active delta between what a learner figures out independently and what they achieve when guided. To bridge that gap, the learner requires a catalyst, which Vygotsky called the MKO, the more knowledgeable other. This drawing demonstrates the dynamic. A toddler might lack motor skills and spatial logic to build a complex tower of blocks independently, but with a father acting as the MKO, steadying the structure and pointing to the next piece, the child successfully completes the task. The father is providing scaffolding. It is a highly tailored form of support that bridges the gap in the child's current ability and is intentionally withdrawn piece by piece as the child gains independent competence. The MKO and the surrounding environment act as a temporary external extension of the child's own mind, allowing them to execute logic far beyond their natural biological age. Language represents the most sophisticated form of scaffolding an MKO provides, giving the child a shared system to regulate their behavior and solve problems. Vygotsky observed that children frequently speak aloud to themselves when trying to solve problems. This private speech is initially used purely to regulate their own physical actions. This schematic details how that process moves inward. As a child matures, their external speech and independent thoughts slowly merge. The spoken instructions become internalized, forming the foundation of complex cognitive thought. We now have neurobiological data proving Vygotsky's theory that adopting cultural tools physically alters human biology. When an individual learns a second language, the gray matter density in their left inferior parietal cortex increases. This structural upgrade yields significant cognitive benefits. Bilingual individuals show enhanced executive functions, allowing them to shift between complex tasks more efficiently, and the physical changes in the brain can delay the onset of dementia by up to 4 years. But rewiring the system comes with structural trade-offs. Because the brain is managing dual linguistic frameworks, bilingual speakers often exhibit slightly smaller vocabularies and slower lexical access in their memory banks. Cultural tools like language do more than just fill the mind with abstract facts. They expand and reconfigure the brain's physical processing hardware. To accurately map human cognition, we cannot discard either theory. Both frameworks are required to explain the whole mind. Piaget successfully isolated the internal mechanics. He showed us the fracture and rebuild sequence a biological mind uses to update its understanding of reality. Vygotsky mapped the environmental inputs. He demonstrated how external scaffolding and cultural tools dictate what data enters that engine, accelerating its capacity. Cognitive development occurs through the synergy between these forces, where biological readiness meets the expansion provided by social input. Human intelligence is ultimately defined by our ability to continuously take the external tools provided by our environment and accommodate them into the architecture of our own minds.